Hello all and welcome to tonight's, well actually it's morning already, it's 12:05, so this very early morning bourbon review. So I decided to go and buy a bottle of bourbon for various reasons. I wanted to. And I realized I haven't reviewed a very famous one yet. This is Maker's Mark Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. 45% ABV, so that's 90 proof. And why haven't I reviewed it yet? Well, just because, well, for various reasons. One thing about Maker's Mark is that it's it's one of those ones that you'll find on the top shelf of every bar. So this is one of the top shelf bourbon. It'll be probably right next to Nob Hill on most top shelves. And unlike most bourbons, oh, you can find this just about anywhere, by the way. So supermarkets, drugstores, this is the one that you'll find anywhere. $25 for a bottle. And the one thing about Maker's Mark is that it is slightly different from the vast majority of bourbon whiskeys in that it is a wheated bourbon. Now, as you probably know, most bourbons, of course, have to legally contain at least 51% corn in their mash bill. And most, barley and other grains make up the other share. Now, the vast majority of bourbons tend to have rye as their second most major grain additive in their bourbon. But Maker's Mark is one of the few that uses wheat instead of rye. So it ends up having a lot more softer note to it than a lot of, other bourbon whiskeys, because rye tends to add a lot more spice, citrus notes, peppery notes, whereas wheat tends to add a lot more bready and baker-like notes. So let's read the label, shall we? And they got a lot of stuff on the label, so let's just go here. Maker's Mark is America's only handmade bourbon whiskey, never mass-produced. Well, that's a few decades outdated at this point. Each individual batch is less than 19 barrels, and this small quantity means that we can be choosy about everything we use and everything we do to craft our whiskey. That's why we use the old-style sour mash method. We start each new batch fermentation by using a little of the last, resulting in a more consistent product. We're proud of our unique and full-flavored, handmade bourbon, and so we add our Maker's Mark to each bottle. Enjoy. So, yeah. Maker's Mark is also kind of rare in that it is an independent distiller in this day and age. A lot of the old school big distilleries have been bought out by larger concerns. Maker's Mark still pretty much is owned by Star Hill and focuses only on making Maker's Mark and Maker's Mark Cask Strength. So, I've already poured it out already. Kind of see, it's a light golden brown, light golden yellow, almost dark brown tinges to it. Fairly thin on the leggings. You can kind of see it here. Nose has a lot of sweetness to it. Brown sugar. Marzipan. Nuttiness that's reminiscent of dry almonds. Almost like a baked bread smell to it. Small hints of sweet stone fruit. Very small hints. But overall, kind of brown sugar, kind of bake smell to it. Very sweet on the nose. This is probably the thinnest mouthfeel I've ever had on, anything that wasn't rock gut bourbon. Not saying this is rock gut bourbon, but I'm saying it is very thin on the mouthfeel. And I'm not sure if that's because there's less residual sugars here, or because of the fact that it's a wheated bourbon. I don't have much experience with wheated bourbons. The only other one that's really famous is Pappy's, and it'll take a lottery win for me to be reviewing Pappy's on this channel. Very sweet up front, but it gets dry towards the finish. There's a hint of, well, I wouldn't say it's a hint. There's a tad bit of ethanol hotness in the finish, unfortunately. There's no age statement on this bottle, which leads me to believe that it's fairly young for a bourbon. Lots of wood char in that finish, too, underneath that hotness. There's a nice caramelized note on the tongue in the long finish. From the front and into the mid, it's almost like a sweet bready note. Very much like a Portuguese sweet bread. Hints of brown sugar also in the front. It's kind of interesting how sweet it is in the onset and then how it generally dries out in that finish there. Not a whole bunch of complexity on the palate as compared to in the nose. And other than the fact that it is slightly hot and thin on the mouthfeel, it's a perfectly drinkable bourbon whiskey. Honestly, I prefer the rye, the more common mash bill that contains high rye, but it's drinkable. There's nothing wrong with it, and there's no really off notes. It's just, on the palate, not very challenging. It's drinkable and fairly smooth. Well, a lot of people go and, kind of crap on Maker's Mark because, well, it's old school, it's not part of, it's been around for a long while. And it's, like I said, it's everywhere. And it's not very complex or big, taste-wise. That said, it's a wheated whiskey. It's pretty much the only example of a wheated bourbon whiskey that you're going to be able to find just about anywhere. It's kind of hard to find other wheated whiskeys. If anyone can tell me where to find other wheated whiskeys in Hawaii, I'd kind of be happy to. Not the super expensive Pappy. I know you can get Pappy at places, but I can't afford no Pappy, please. And there's nothing bad about it, but if you're looking for something to wow you, that's not it. But if you're looking for something to go and drink at, this is something you can find at a dive bar, and you won't be disappointed at it. So, you know, it's a safe thing to go and get because it's everywhere in places that you're pretty sure you're not going to get much else in terms of quality. So, Maker's Mark. That's your bourbon whiskey review for tonight, folks. Cheers.